was doing some an opera theater of St. Louis. I was doing my opera Under the Double Moon, and they were doing a production of Abduction. And I thought, seeing this Mozart opera, I was thinking to myself in my funny way, thinking about how Peter Sellers would direct it. And I thought he might do it as the Patty Hearst story, because of, it's about trying to make, he's always into making operas more contemporary. But I was thinking about all the ways it wouldn't work well that way, because of the Pasha and the Pasha's role, etc. It didn't quite fit the story. And then I thought, well, wait a second, wouldn't it be great to do an opera about that? Because this idea of someone who's lost who loses themselves and identifies with something, and becomes actually changes their name. And then I had this vision thinking about an opera singer with an AK-47, and so that was a big image for me.
Dad, I'm okay. I had a few scrapes and stuff, but they've washed them up and they're getting okay. And I've caught a cold, but they're giving me pills for it. I'm with a combat unit that's armed with automatic weapons, and there's also a medical team here, and there's no way that I will be released until they let me go. So it wouldn't do any good for somebody to come in here and try to get me out by force.
It was really the first big media event. It was before OJ. It was, where every day it was in the newspapers, where's Patty Hearst? And, it was a huge media event. It was the first big made-for-TV event.
I think in a way it was has a relationship to X, because X was my opera about Malcolm X was a kind of an identity story too. And it's sort of about transformation, and X, each act in X was a name change. So, and Tania was sort of natural, so it was sort of the dark comic version of that, in the sense that, see Patty Hearst, Patty become Tania, and then she becomes Patty again. So that cyclical idea was interesting, and different take on the identity issue. I was fortunate to work with a wonderful librettist, Michael John LaChiusa, who was a total nut about the Patty Hearst kidnapping. I mean, as a child, he used to play Patty Hearst and hide in a box to pretend that he was being locked up in a closet. So, and he had all the neighborhood kids acting out the kidnapping. So when I was looking for a librettist to write it, and I interviewed various people, and Michael John sort of walked into my life and said, "Oh, we could do it like this," and it was perfect, because I said I wanted a darkly comic kind of take on the story, and he had this whole conception of the opera being in two locales, basically her bedroom and the closet world, and so that began. Then the opera really began to take shape, and we worked back and forth a lot. And actually wrote it in for me, the shortest possible time I've ever written an opera. I think I wrote the whole thing in about 6 or 7 months. The SLA, in a way, was sort of the end of, I would think, the kind of revolutionary period in our culture, it marked sort of the end of certain kind of radicalism, as we kind of descended later into the Reagan years, So I felt that to me, that there's so many elements of the opera. When I approached it musically, for example, how I depicted there's this kind of nostalgia toward the idea of the kind of romance of the revolution, the idea that what you can do can change the world, which is kind of ironic today, but I felt that, and then also the feeling of, and in the SLA's case, this feeling of this wholly misguided energy, which they had no idea, no real concrete agenda, no sense of what what really their ultimate purpose was, and that everything was just become a parody of what before had been, the civil rights struggle and Black Power struggle and all these other issues in the feminist revolution of the 60s. All that stuff that was real had become a kind of weird parody of itself. This kind of sense of of all the idealism almost being commodified, that everything has become so normalized that it has become a product. And in Tania, in Michael John's libretto, there are all these references to, GM, General Motors, Cadillac, Disneyland. All those things are like the things of value in a way and it even starts with I like the brand kind better, because this whole thing of kind of this hopelessness in this commodified society.
You sure like these. I could hear the tone. Me too. Ask me. Ask me. I like the brand kind better. I wish these were the brand kind. Taste the same. No, I don't like these kind. Taste the same. No. Taste the same. I like the brand kind better. It tastes the same. Taste the same. It tastes the same. Taste the same. Ask me. That commercial sucks.
The fascination with the story, how somebody, I really believe that she was in her bedroom at college and not political, and living, with all the money and all the privilege that she had, and unaware of, what was going on. And I really believed that she was put in a closet and that something snapped inside her, and also maybe the fact that I really believed that, I remember being appalled when her mother wouldn't resign from the Board of Regents to save her, when they asked her mother to, as a mother now, I would do anything for my son. And, the fact that I think she was convinced that really at a certain point, especially after the fire, that nobody cared about her, and that she was on her own, and I think she really lost it. And then how she's come back. And the interesting thing is how she's come back. We watched a movie the other night that was actually almost taken from our story, Cecil B. Demented, where she's in the movie. And someone was telling me about a movie they watched last night that she was in, where she actually took off her clothes. And she's like really she came back, but she never was the same. She really kind of broke out. Maybe there was a part of her that needed to break out, and those elements were fostered through whatever experience she had. And for me, it just was amazing to do a role where, first of all, the music was so incredible, and second of all, to transform so many times, to go through so many different changes.
Once upon a time,
sick allure of terrorism, you know, the sickness of it. These are people that didn't have a lot of other things. It wasn't the same as somebody who really, I don't know, these people were not people that thought out their cause and really understood what they were doing and took some kind of action. They really just needed something in their life to focus on, which I think is a lot of what's happening now. There was no reasoning. There's no reasoning, but it was alluring to them to be in this cause and to have their comrades and to just let themselves behave in any way that they felt like behaving, sexually and physically, and there's an allure to that now has so much relevance, to see how so many people could become involved in something like this.
Of course, bringing in Cindy was natural since she originated the role, and I'd written the piece for her, and so that was the easiest part. Avery Brooks, of course, was Cinque in the original workshop production of Tania, and I think people are just not aware that he was a singer and that how incredibly talented this person is. I mean, even though he's been a TV star on Deep State Space Nine and, you know, done movies and television shows, etc. But I've worked with him for a long period of time. You know, we first started working together, I guess, over 20 years ago. He's one of the most amazingly versatile artists I've ever met. You know, able to not only act and direct and sing, but play the piano and play the saxophone, and one of those naturally talented people.
My beloved
course, I knew Tony before, you know, and knew his music, and, you know, was a fan, as I still am now. I hadn't heard the entire opera until Tony sent me a tape a couple of months ago. And I'm always shocked and thrilled, you know, when people remember me. You know, Tony called me up and asked me to sing, so I haven't sung with him, you know, since, what, 92 or 91, whatever it was. Fortunately, I was living through the time, so, I mean, the research is already done, essentially. I mean, Michael John Chiusa's text is pretty fascinating. I think the fairy tale aspect of the thing, you know, the inversion, the inverting, the convergence of ideas is particularly interesting here. We still know very little about Cinque, you know. I mean, he kind of appeared and then suddenly he's, you know, a bright light and then he's gone. I think of the times, I think the text lends itself to the confusion, the bizarre, the absurd, the horror, you know, of those times.
After the fire, after defeat, you're gonna see through the ashes, you're gonna feel the heat, you're gonna feel the heat, you're gonna feel the heat.
It has something to do with the collective memory. That's really the deal. So, you know, everybody knows I'm not Cinque. But whatever I do know about him and whatever you know about him, and we find something between us. I mean, that's the beauty of the live performance in any case, is that we find some crystalline moment between us and that we search for one. But certainly, whatever happens happens among us, between us, in the collective memory. So, if in fact I get close enough to it, then that's wonderful. If not, I'll try again. It's not just one thing that informs, you know, the approach to the work. We use everything.
Thomas Young, of course, I've had a long relationship. He was in X, you know, played Elijah Muhammad and Street in X. And then he was in Under Double Moon. He played the Inspector. And then in Amistad, he was the trickster god in my opera Amistad. So he's been in every opera I've ever written. Actually, the only opera he hadn't performed in was Tania, because originally he wasn't in the original cast of Tania. But I thought, when I thought of doing this part, I said, well, what would be really, and what would it be like on a recording? I thought that he would be incredible in it. So I was so fortunate to get Tom to come here to sing.
Love you more.
And he's amazing and gifted in that he bridges both being a high lyric tenor, you know, who has high Ds, and dramatic cutting quality to his voice. At the same time, he's a jazz singer, one of the greatest jazz singers today. And he's able to scat, he's able to sing in a jazz style, and there aren't too many people like that who perform in both traditions at the highest level.
Well, in this particular project, Anthony just basically gave me a call and asked if I had the time available to do it. Originally, as the piece was conceived, I was not scheduled to be involved. In fact, Anthony and I were joking about the fact that of the 4 operas that he's written, this is the only one that I was not involved with from the conception. So it's very much an add-on component that I'm hopefully will be able to fulfill for him in terms of putting together the music and giving it the kind of structure that he wants.
Necessary things a human needs.
role of the father is basically one that takes place within the concept of this particular view of a family, which is, in some respects, dysfunctional.
It's easy to hand out a loan. It's easy to write another check. It's easy to sell off every star. But love,
And the role of the father is basically one who takes what I would say a relatively passive role in the dysfunction. He's not a particularly assertive character. He doesn't really assert any strong sense of value or any strong sense of rightness or wrongness with regards to how people are treated. Essentially, he's a relatively innocuous character, in fact. The musical style in which I have to sing is actually fairly active. So it tends to belie the sort of passive nature of the character. So in that respect, the two have to, it seems to me, be kept in some sort of balance and counterbalance.
never let it be taken. Got it. Never let it go free. Got it. Never, 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 never let it go free.
Obviously, if you're singing to an English audience, there is an immediate response which is built into a vocabulary that has already been established with regards to the language. In terms of process of learning it, I don't find any particular difference, but there are reasons for that. One of the reasons is that my basic approach is that language informs the tone. Not everybody believes that, and not everyone approaches their music that way, but I do. So, in point of fact, it doesn't really make any difference whether you're singing in English or whether you're singing in Italian. It has to have a kind of dramatic realism involved, which means that on a certain level it has to have a sort of conversational quality about it, irrespective of the presentational quality which is built into opera. There has to be a character who is sustaining a conversation that comes off the page. I mean, I think John Malkovich said it very simply. He said if the audience doesn't believe the actor is who he or she says he or she is, then they're not a good actor. So, to the extent that I try and establish a character that is believable, I would say that in terms of preparation, for me, there's no essential difference. You still have to arrive at an understanding of the language which has a kind of facility, which, for lack of a better word, is conversational in nature. Now, there are obviously different rules that apply in terms of the kinds of sounds that exist in English that don't exist, obviously, in Italian or German or French. But the approach, it seems to me, still has to be one which is rooted in language.
There was once a time we landed on the beaches, crawled on our bellies, looking for a great height. Lightning, moonspell, all the stars we asked. There were stars we knew, they burned in our bellies. As we reached a greater height, there were stars whispering the word.
It's basically an old story. The drama really has to be contained within the music, irrespective of whatever the libretto happens to be, which is, I think, one of the reasons why Verdi is so highly thought of, because he was an extraordinary man of letters in terms of understanding what music could do to sustain the drama. And I think Anthony's music does that.
Never give away a heart for love. Love you mustn't part with. Time to
Cynthia and Thomas and Avery were the nucleus, and then you drew on some
Yeah.
talents here at UCSD.
Yes, talents at UCSD, and also with San Diego, with the San Diego Opera, you know, their program, and so that brought in Jana and Preeti, and they were wonderful, wonderful singers. And then, of course, I brought in some instrumentalists too. J.D. Perrin, who's a multi-instrumentalist, plays clarinet and contrabass clarinet and flute and soprano saxophone on the CD. Unbelievable improviser. And Jerry Hemingway, who's been a drummer who's played with me for a while.
Don't say it, don't say it.
Yeah, since the early 70s. So he's probably the expert on playing percussion in my music. And so it's natural for me to bring him in to play. And he's a very sensitive player and understands my rhythmic concepts and how the grooves in my music work.
They have a unique understanding of how to enhance the drama through improvisation.
There were several improvisatory sections, and they were usually done with clarinet, played by J.D. Perrin, as I remember. And I wanted the context before I start to improvise, because in the jazz context, you have most jazz players play on harmony or scales. And I'm of a mind that most journeymen can do that. Perrin once said, it's an out-of-body experience, and we went at it. Now, what was interesting in improvisation, it either happens or it doesn't. If you are like-minded, you start to play, and sometimes it just is wonderful. You get a lot of stuff back, and you can push stuff out there. With J.D., it was immediate. I played 2 notes, and we're off. And I knew then that we're going to go somewhere interesting.
I've tried to incorporate the improviser into the music. And I like the idea that every performance of the opera will be a little different. And also the musicians are able to have a commentary, make a comment on what's going on in stage. You know, so it was very important when we did the production that they could see. You know, we had monitors to see what's going on stage, and they would sort of develop their own response to it. I mean, I have to say the music mostly is like 95% notated, but there are sections, you know, some transitional sections that I purposefully left for improvisation, left for the improviser, so that there would be these moments which would sort of grow out of the piece that would leave that space. And to me, the ultimate minimalist was James Brown, you know? I mean, Steve Reich and Philip Glass have their thing, but James Brown to me is much more interesting because he had an idea of how the dynamic, rhythmic, you know, power that's in the music. And so I like to use this sense of groove, and then also play against it, so that in a way, I was inspired by someone like Billie Holiday, for example, how Billie Holiday sings, which on the surface you might say is rubato, but it's always in time. I mean, rubato means stretching within the time without actually, not what it's done using the operatic tradition where the time actually stops. So the time is always there, but you have all this freedom within the time. So I try to write that freedom. So write the melodic material in a way that makes the voice sound free within the rhythm.
And the funk goes this way, and the funk goes that. And the funk goes this way, and the funk goes that. And the funk goes this way, and the funk goes that. And the funk goes this way, and the funk goes that. Gonna sip through the ashes and feel the heat. You're gonna sip through the ashes and feel the heat. You're gonna sip through the ashes and feel the heat. You're gonna sip through the ashes and feel the heat. And the funk goes this way, and the funk goes that. And the funk goes this way, and the funk goes that. And the funk goes this way, and the funk goes.
But that's part of our kind of a particularly American vocal tradition, which is about swing, finding ways to swing, ways to have that feeling of the rhythmic propulsion. And rather than for me writing in 4/4 and having straightforward swing, I have used these more elaborate rhythmic 13s and 11s and 15s, and then all kinds of alternating patterns of rhythm that to me set up a kind of groove, a kind of in a way almost like a motet, rhythmic rhythmic structure. Where you have isorhythmic motets, and then with that, in that you have the melodic freedom.
Who Will Play Me is an example of where it has to swing, but it's written so that it has to swing. Having not sung jazz, basically been classically trained, it had to swing, and the way that I was able to swing it was because I was following what was written down. It was written as a swing, the voice parts.
I looked at those grooves and those ostinati and I said, this is beautiful. And of course, they're not sort of an ostinato like Stravinsky would write or has written. Bum, bim, bum, 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 bum. They're sort of lyric. So there's really something where you can dig your teeth into it interpretively, but you have to be there with the straight ahead forward motion of the time. So it takes a classical player with a jazz background or a jazz player with good classical chops, so to speak, to really dig in. And it just never ended, it just kept on going.
Look at that! What?
The pattern in Who Will Play Me, for example, is 11/4. So it's a kind of 11 pattern underneath. But I'm really thinking of the melodic material in 4. You know, so if you could do it, if I wrote a straight version of it, I could write it in 4/4. So there's it sort of makes the accompaniment out of phase with the vocal writing, which is one of the effects I want to get. In a performance, in a way, you know, it's just in a way it's almost so improvisational in the sense that things happen and you just have to deal with it. You know, that moment's gone. You can't go back and work on it. You can't do anything else. It just happened, and that's great too. I mean, it has sort of visceral effect, all that thing. But for me, the recording is so interesting because you're really putting together the piece in almost a way to represent the idea, and you really, and to me it's a creative process because you get different ideas about things to do that would try to make the oral experience more rewarding, you know. Yeah, just more, everyone just needs to play out more, but yeah, when it starts at bar 15, dun, 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 like one, no, like that. Whether it's, you know, moving the sound, you know, how, you know, having the sound, you know, move, or where the voices are placed, or a lot of issues like that. Yeah. And I think sometimes ideas come to you in the recording studio that you wouldn't think about when you were actually just watching a performance.
I love performing. I love the energy of the audience. I've always been a performer. I always turn on for an audience. Something inside me lights up. But there's something else that's even deeper when you're collaborating with a lot of musicians on the incredibly high level, with music that's incredibly high level and difficult. And somehow it comes together and it works right. And Rand Steiger, who's the conductor, just really brought it all together in a way that was incredibly positive, and we were able to really work together.
Did you die? Okay.
And then don't have her hold.
Well, you know what? We'll just do this in vocal rehearsal tomorrow.
Right, exactly. That's what we need to do. And then, did you die in the fire? And then, did you die in the fire? Don't have her cut off with everyone else.
Here, it's really stupendous how much the university has put into this recording setup. I mean, it's magnificent. Really exciting to be able to work here. Since you've got the studio here and it's, you know, technically sophisticated, there wasn't any point in bringing in additional technical crew, but they did want to bring in an overseeing producer. So that's my job.
Joe, we're coming out of the solo through the fire and feel the heat. We're coming right out of that to an orchestral interlude for quite a ways.
What a music producer does is, this is the person who's responsible for getting from point A to whatever point B is, the finished product. Either the finished product is a concert or the finished product is a record, in this case a CD. There are a lot of steps that go on, including putting together the funding package, putting together all the different pieces of the puzzle in terms of personnel, and then actually running the session, and then actually editing, mastering, mixing the record, and manufacturing it. For a CD, that's a lot of different steps, and rarely does one person do all those steps unless, you know, you wanted to do your own CD, you would basically do all those things. But typically, for a major project, the label is responsible for putting together the production team. The label, with the participation of the artist or the artistic entity, puts together the budgets to create, the wherewithal to do the project properly. The label would hire the producer. The artist probably hire the players. It just depends on who at what stage. My particular role as project producer or session producer is to come in to the actual recording sessions and make sure that they run smoothly, make sure that we stay on track in terms of our time frame, make sure that the elements are there musically. I mark in my score where we have usable takes and where we still need to record, so that when the sessions are done, I can take that score home and take all the tapes home and assemble a finished recording from that.
It just sounds, it just sounds like, thank you. I was going to say, it sounds like a piano with the lid closed.
I got on a short stick. It's on a short stick. And what I was trying to do is just control it.
If we can put the lid up and not lose, if the guys in front of that baffle don't mind, it'd be a lot prettier. But on the other hand, I don't mind it sounding like a jazz piano. I don't mind that, and want Anthony's advice before we did anything drastic. But to me, the fact that the lid is closed is just the predominant sound. Do I like that? I haven't decided, but that's what I'm hearing.
There's so different sounds. Sometimes you have that classical sound, and sometimes you have the jazz sound.
It's comparable to a director in the movies, where this is the person who has to just know from start to finish that it's all there and in the can, so to speak, so that we can make a finished record out of it.
Joe and I are working on that. We might want to take the lid back down, but anyway, it's a choice we have to make.
Where are the mics placed?
Take a look.
Yeah.
If you play lightly, like you just were, what's the predominant sound you hear? Action. And that's really a problem with this piano in general for quiet things.
Right.
So what I was trying to do with this is to keep the mics as much out of the action as possible.
It's not so bad for this music, though, because it's got that,
My role in a project of this sort is really to realize the wishes of the composer and the producer. I mean, obviously I have my own opinions on how things should be done. I state those opinions in the pre-production planning. I try and get as many of my needs met as far as organization, rehearsal time, the way sessions are structured. All of those issues I try and solve before we start the production, so that when the actual recording starts, when the downbeat comes, the entire team is on the same page. We have a common vision, that if there was any difference of opinion as to how something should be done, those issues have to be behind us when the downbeat starts. That everybody has to be on the same page, moving forward on the same road, or else you'll spend more time fighting with each other in concept rather than making music and being able to end up with a unified whole at the end. That if you don't have a unified vision in the beginning, then when you get to the end, the contrast of the change as you go through the recording process will be very apparent. Organized here is a stereo setup here for some of the choir and the 2D parts, and a stereo setup there for some of the choir and 2D parts, and two solo mics, one here and one there. So it really depends on which scene we're doing and how we want the singer spread across the sound field, where you'll actually be standing. How I try and direct the rehearsal process from the point of view of a recording is to try and set the studio up as I think I'm going to be doing the recording. And then from the instant the musicians walk into the studio, they're faced with the acoustical situation and the miking constraints that I'm imposing on them. I'm more than amenable to moving mics, moving partitions, making adjustments to make it easier for them. But what I find incredibly difficult is for them to come in into either our studio or to rehearse in another space. and get used to that acoustic, get used to hearing the other musicians in a certain way, and then halfway through the rehearsal process, change how they're listening to other instruments, the space between the other instruments. All of those kinds of situations really are disorienting to a musician. So when we're planning large ensemble projects like this, I make sure that I'm involved very early in the process, that we schedule as many of the rehearsals in the studio as possible. That gives me an opportunity to work with different miking schemes to make sure that the producer can hear what I can do and with the miking, and make sure that we get a mix that's acceptable. But also it gives the musicians a chance to work out all the kinks. There are a couple of double headsets if you prefer having both ears covered. We can provide those, but there are single headsets there, I think, at most of the stations.
Like Glastrons.
It takes a while to get everything balanced and to get everything organized, to make sure that everybody has exactly what they need when they need it. Also, as we're working through the rehearsal process, I'm taking notes as to what the particular problems are with each scene, any particular instruments that pose a particular problem, the quality of the sound of an instrument. Say a trumpet, for example, might be too bright. And my personal preference is to change microphones rather than to use EQ, if I can do that. And when we have 3 or 4 rehearsals, then it allows me the time to go in and optimize the EQ on the instruments with microphones and mic preamps rather than with equalization. And that gives a much more natural quality to the instruments, and I think a much better overall product at the end. We took many of the microphones from the recording setup and positioned them in the same way for the performance, so that we did use the basic template of what we had in the studio and transferred that over to the concert hall, and basically assigned everything the same way, used the same basic gain structures, started with the same mix that we had here, so that when the engineer came in to actually mix it, he was about 80% where he needed to be before the ensemble played a note.
There's a kind of emptiness about it. The sense of this, literally, I mean, she's gone through the fire. I mean, in the production we had Tania, she decides, part of her desire in looking back from her bedroom in Connecticut was the feeling that she should have been in the fire and died with her comrades. So when she goes into the fire, it's almost like in a way you could say it's a purification. So like a little bit like Brunhilde or something like that, but the thing of going through the fire and coming out, and she comes out sort of in a way kind of this kind of emptiness comes out. She returns to her life, but she's not. She's a shell of a shell of a person, and to me, because it's dealing with the trauma of the event that will always haunt her. This incredibly traumatic event. The fact that behind the closet door are these terrors. The terror just lies behind the closet. Terror is under your pillow in your darkest dream. I mean, this terror is very immediate. It's something you live with. So in a way, that after September 11th became so appropriate because this kind of sense of living with this terror that's so intimate and so close to you, and so much a part. It could be so much a part of your daily life. I guess in Israel they've had that for some time, but I think that, but this response in the opera was really dealing with that, and that feeling of and at the end what the aftermath of something like that is.
In a way, with the events that have happened recently, it's given me that kind of feeling where my priorities have changed. Since September 11th, it's like something where an event or somebody, a terrorist or somebody comes in and just changes your life, just rips you, and all of the things that you thought were important, you know, are not as important as they are now. Where in the beginning of the opera, she's, you know, I like the brand kind better. I'd rather eat this cracker than this cracker. Or I'd rather, go, you know, be in General Motors or, and at the end, she said, taste the same. Doesn't really matter. And something really radically changed inside her. And I think for all of us, something's changed.
Everybody